So first of all, a little quick bit about who we are. So GSMA is the trade association for the mobile industry globally. About 95% of all mobile operators are members. In particular, the bit I run is a development fund. We're a team of about nearly 50 people now, been running for about 8 years, really looking at how mobile has an impact in emerging markets. So Latin America, Sub-Saharan Africa, Southeast Asia. And really the thing we do, and the simplest way to describe what we do, is we do scale. So it's pretty much a given now that the mobile phone is probably one of the most phenomenal development tools the world has seen. But more importantly, it's one of the most ubiquitous pieces of technology and one of the most ubiquitous networks. So what we do in the development fund is we say, okay, how can this ubiquitous technology and how can these ubiquitous networks impact on key development issues in countries? And we have programs across lots of different development areas. But really, it starts with a phone. And in most cases, it's a very basic phone. Smartphone penetration in most developing countries is no more than 10%. And yet the level of innovation of what we see people doing with these phones is phenomenal. So in most cases, it's a very basic 2G phone. At most of the technology we work with, because we're trying for scale and we're trying for ubiquity, is text or USSD. We're working on very, very basic ubiquitous technologies, and we're managing to deliver incredibly innovative services there. But the first thing that happens, and there are 6 billion people, connections out there at the moment, people that have phones. Africa is by far the largest growing mobile market in the world, and we released a report about a month ago detailing the numbers on that. But it starts with someone getting a hold of a phone. And what that phone means to someone is it means that they have access to a whole bunch of services, and they have access to a phenomenal amount of capability that they haven't had before, and things that most of us would take for granted that often become innovative in those areas. More importantly, and what I'm going to propose as we go through these examples, is that what's happening is it means that a lot of these countries are massively leapfrogging where we are. And that actually a lot of the innovation that we see happening in countries, not just in Africa, but also in Latin America and Southeast Asia, is actually some of the most exciting mobile innovation that we will see anywhere. And it's not because they're great iPhone apps, and it's not because they're incredibly innovative things on iPads. It's because the connection between a very simple mobile phone and the physical world and the physical needs of people living there is being bridged by mobile technology. So it starts with a phone. And a phone means you have access to finance. And as Monty was saying with his examples from Somaliland, one of the first things that's really driven mobile innovation and really an entire explosion of mobile innovation in these countries is access to finance. And what we do in our work is we look for these deltas. We say, where is there lack of access to a service and where is there access to mobiles? So in many countries, there'll be 60 to 70% penetration of mobiles, perhaps no more than 15, 20% access to finance. So how can we use mobile phones to bridge that gap? And then you get to a situation like Kenya, where in Kenya at the moment, over 70% of the adult population uses M-Pesa, a mobile money transaction service. It transacts on average about $1.5 billion a month. In terms of transactions in Kenya alone, there are more mobile money transactions than there are on Western Union's entire global network every month. It is now replacing cash. It is now getting to a situation where people are building entirely new business models based on the way that M-Pesa works in Kenya. And that's spreading out to Tanzania, that's spreading out to Uganda, spreading out to Nigeria, it's spreading out to Pakistan. It's becoming something that provides access to finance for people that would not get it any other way. And this is built around the fact that everyone has mobile phones, but it's also built around the fact that the physical infrastructure is out there as well. So what mobile operators do when they build networks is they need to sell airtime to people. So in an average developing country, a mobile operator will have a physical distribution network of 6,000 to 10,000 agents. And when mobile money is successful, operators get very good at turning those airtime agents into cash-in, cash-out agents. And suddenly you have 10,000 banking points, and all the banker needs is a 2G phone. That becomes quite an unassailable mobile money service and a financial service. So you provide financial inclusion. You give people that through no other methodology would have access to savings, would have access to loans, would have access to money transfer, would have access to mobile payments, and you do it that way. Quick example, I was talking to a guy who ran a chemist shop in a market just outside Nairobi, and he had an M-Pesa agency as one of the desks in his chemist. And I said, you know, is it making good money for you? And he said, yes, within 3 months of being an M-Pesa agent, he was earning more money from the M-Pesa agency than he was from his chemist shop. And really, he just kept the chemist shop there as a shell to keep the M-Pesa agency going. And the reason why he was successful was he was outside a market. And every single market stall holder was using him as an electronic float, using him to deposit money in and get money out and send money to traders. So there is an entire digital business that exists out there that is running on mobile money. And then also that we're providing access to agricultural information. So there are a lot of services, Reuters Market Lights, Nokia Life Tools, etc., that provide agricultural information to people in rural farms. And this takes one of two different types. There is the basic agricultural information. We run a service with Bharti Airtel in India that reaches 5 million farmers at the moment, that provides them free voicemail services, pushing voicemail out to people saying, this is how you can get more out of your crops. This is how you can protect your crops against a certain blight. This is some good animal husbandry tips. Here is the weather, etc., etc. All the way through to far more sophisticated technology, and Reuters, Market Light, and Nokia Life Tools specialize in this, which is distributing market information. So in many developing countries, up to 70% of the people that live in those countries are smallholder farmers. And they're often very reliant on the prices that they can get from local aggregators and people that buy their stocks. By texting them information on what prices are in different markets, they can massively increase the benefit they get from the goods that they have to sell. So very, very simple things can work like that. And then looking even more sophisticated, there's a service called Kilimo Salama in Kenya that uses mobile in many different ways to provide access to farmers and benefits for farmers. So one of the major things, as most of these people are sustenance or smallholder farmers, is a bad piece of weather or something that affects your crop can wipe out your income. And getting insurance, which most agricultural farmers in Europe and Western countries take for granted, is almost impossible. So Kilimo Salama is a micro insurance product that uses mobile, and it uses mobile in lots of different ways. First of all, it uses the mobile phone to actually set up the micro insurance account for the farmer, that prevents them from having to walk to a village miles away to walk to a broker's office to get the insurance. But secondly, it uses the base stations to put weather stations in the base stations to get a much more granular understanding of what the weather conditions are in the region. Then when the weather conditions indicate that there has been a drought or there has been some kind of event that triggers the insurance, the farmer gets a text to say, the insurance is triggered, you're going to get your money, and that money can then be sent via mobile money. So something that could take weeks or days for the farmer to access, first of all in setting up the account and then going back and forth to the broker's office to see whether they were going to get a payout, can now be entirely done on the mobile platform. So we're seeing a huge impact there as well. Health information, a lot of you will be aware of mHealth services, and people will think sometimes these are very innovative services. We may have all seen services from Ericsson who are looking at getting epidemiology and other services sitting on the camera phones on smartphones. And we've seen lots of organizations use smartphones with community health workers, putting far more information into the hands of community health workers and getting them out there. But actually some of the most basic services are things that just tell people really simple information, particularly in maternal health, very basic things like telling a mother not to give your young child water, give her milk. Massively impacts on maternal health. And suddenly we're realizing that actually using mobile technology, we can get health information out to people where there is absolutely no impact and no health services whatsoever. So you can get health information via your mobile phones as well. And learning opportunities as well. A fantastic service run by BBC World Service Trust in Bangladesh called Janala used voice and IVR to teach people English. Really simple service. You dialed up the number, you got an English lesson, and it taught you English. They saw a huge amount of innovation in the way that people used that platform. First of all, teachers putting the phone on speakerphone in the middle of the class and letting the entire class listen to the IVR message. And one of the things I really love that happened with that service as well is they built the capability into that service to allow people to record what they were saying. Partly so that people could hear how they were progressing as they were learning English, but also they could hear other people. So they built a very simple part of the IVR system that allowed you to record you saying English phrases as part of the lessons, and then you could hear your own back and you could hear other people's as well. After a while, they went back to this and found out that 40,000 people were using this as an audio blogging platform. And then actually they were taking something that had been built as a learning structure, realizing it was actually a publishing and broadcasting structure, and using it to find a way of talking to people and finding a way to get their information out there. It's one of those wonderful things that happens when you build a platform and people completely subvert it for a totally different reason. And empowerment and equality. One of the things we've run for the last 2 years now is a program called M-Women. We did a research that pointed out that in some countries, particularly in Southeast Asia and the Middle East, a woman was 27% less likely to have a phone than a man. And therefore, a lot of the autonomy that you get from having a mobile phone, which often gives you an identity for the first time, as well as access to financial services and other services, was denied women. So we're working with mobile operators to develop tariffs, develop services, and I'm really a lot of time asking them to recognize that women are customers in their region that they should serve to them. Now sometimes, particularly Middle East countries, this is as simple as recognizing that you have to have a woman serving in your shops because a woman in your culture cannot walk in and buy something from a man. So therefore you have to understand gender sensitivities in the way you sell. But also in the way that marketing is spent. Again, the mobile impact that mobile operators and the mobile industry have is not just in the physical infrastructure and the phones, but in the huge marketing spend. And putting a woman on a poster in many countries is a hugely transformative act. So we can do a lot in targeting women and promoting women as customers for the services in changing culture. But also you see how once someone gets access to a phone, it really does change their lives. So when we were doing the original research around women, we had a fantastic story of this woman who had 6 different SIM cards in a little embroidered wallet that she had built. And we said, well, why have you got 6 different SIM cards with, as it turned out, 6 different mobile money wallets in each of them? And she said, well, that one's my saving for my child's education, that one's for our health services, that one's if the crops fail, that one's for a rainy day, etc. And she was using each of these different SIM cards as different savings account, which is a really interesting kind of innovative use of the product and the way that people are meeting their needs. Equally, we found a woman in our research who said, I really like mobile money, and we said, why? And she said, well, my husband can beat me up and smash the phone, but he can't access my money. So for the first time, she had access to finance that she herself could own and manage, and there was not actually something that she would have to give up to somebody else. So we're seeing a huge amount of women actually get empowered and get a sense of equality from the way they have access to mobile phones and mobile services. And access to power. We think about information, we think about mobile phones, but actually one of the most innovative projects we run is looking at what infrastructure is out there. So across the developing world, there are 640,000 mobile base stations. Those 640,000 mobile base stations are all off-grid. So the mobile industry has put power into each of those, usually diesel generators. So we started off with a program called Green Power for Mobile, trying to convince those mobile operators to convert from diesel to wind and solar, built an incredibly sophisticated model to show them the CapEx and OpEx savings, and building that out. After a while, we realized that most of these generators were massively overproducing power, and that actually a lot of that power was being wasted. So we launched another program called Community Power, looking at how that power distribution can be distributed to the locals. So rather than dissipating the power as heat or wasting it, you can take the spare electricity from 640,000 base stations and deliver it to the local community. Now, on average, the spare power from a base station is enough to power a health center, 10 houses, or multiple charges of lanterns, phones, whatever electronic device someone wants to plug in. So we effectively have 640,000 base stations, 640,000 power supplies. The CapEx sunk, they're already in place, all the infrastructure's there, with spare energy to build. So we're looking at how we can use that electricity to really bring micro-generation of electricity to rural areas and really bring power to rural populations in a way that is virtually free for them in many cases. And also assistance in a disaster. We are all too aware of the role that mobile phones play when a disaster happens. And one of our examples from one of our South American operators after a disaster, they said the level of traffic they had on their network was the equivalent of 10 New Year's Eves. It absolutely killed them at the point at which their network was most vulnerable. So we're working with mobile operators to say, first of all, how can you make your network resilient? How can you learn how to build power supplies and power sharing networks in place? And how can you understand how to bridge that gap when a network goes down? But then far more importantly, how can you use information? How can you use services like Ushahidi? How can we see, and we saw a lot of it in Japan most recently, how mobiles can be used to provide information to people and get them to get access to information? Because really when you rebuild the mobile network, very often now you rebuild the human network. And most people's first response to a disaster is to check that their loved ones and their family are okay. So mobile can play a critical role in helping in those disaster situations. And also far more importantly for most of you in the room, as the GSMA and as the Development Fund, we can provide you with information. So we've been doing this, as I say, for about 7 or 8 years now. Team of 40 or 50 people working in over 40 countries, multiple projects across lots of areas. We've got a lot of data. And 2 weeks ago, we launched a website called Mobile Development Intelligence, which is a massive open data website. And what it does is it takes all of the data that we have within the GSMA and the Development Fund and puts it online very simply on a country-by-country basis, so you can look it up. But it also aggregates data from as many different open sources as we could find. World Health Organization, World Bank, Nokia, indeed, we've got their total cost of ownership metric in there. Really everything you need to understand how you build a business case or understand even what's going on in a country in terms of mobile development. So we've got a product tracker there. We've got about 650 different mobile development projects tracked in there. You can go on, you can log on, there's a community area, you can find who else is in this space. Really everything that we've found that's within this space that's there available as data so that you can get what you need to be able to build a project and understand what's going on. And finally, if you need to, my contact details are there. Thank you very much.